Hello, I'm Robin Falconer, and today I'm going to talk about some of the series of maps of Antarctica that have been produced over the last 70 years or so. I'm retired now. I first went to Antarctica 55 years ago. I went down on the New Zealand Navy ship Endeavour, which was taking supplies down to Scott Base and McMurdo Sound, and we were mapping the seafloor. And I've had 8 trips to Antarctica on ships mapping the seafloor, and I did a PhD on the tectonics of the area, how New Zealand, Australia and Antarctica have separated over the last 100 million years, and then spent most of the rest of my life in marine sciences and universities, research organisations, and in industry. So I've been making maps basically all my life. Now, Lands and Survey, or the original government department and now called LINZ, Land Information New Zealand, also makes maps. That's what their core business is. And they make all sorts of different ones of New Zealand property and different types of things. But tonight we're talking about their Antarctic maps. The first one they made was in 1952. On the screen now we're looking at the 1955 one. The 1950, it's not much different than the 1952 one, and that was the first official government map of showing Antarctica. And now we're looking at the 1955 map, and it's fairly early. It's got some place names, mostly around the coast, because that was what was known about then. There are still some areas on this map that are completely unknown on the right-hand side and some of the left-hand side. There are places where the coastline is dotted because nobody had ever flown over it, no ship had ever been there, and we just simply didn't know the shape of the land at that time. So interesting, there were still unknown areas in 1955. There aren't any names of bases on this map. The one that's most familiar to us as New Zealand is Scott Base. It wasn't there then, so it's not on this map. But the interesting thing is, why did these maps start to appear? In 1952, there was interest developing in Antarctica after the Second World War and the long period of nothing happening since the expeditions of Scott and Shackleton and others. But 1955, the world was getting ready for the International Geophysical Year, which was a huge international science program that was done in 1956-57. And it led to a huge number of nations establishing bases in Antarctica, including New Zealand establishing Scott Base starting in 1956. And living just near me and Mike and I is Randall Hickey, who was actually the leader of the building of Scott Base in 1956, and he's 93 and he's still going strong, and he still talks about it whenever you meet him. So now we'll go over, Natalie will take us over to the next map, which is 1963, which is after the IGY. You can see a lot more detail. The huge amount of activity in the International Geophysical Year led to much better knowledge of New Zealand. And this map actually contains the locations of lots of bases in Antarctica. There were over 30 bases established in the IGY period. And for the first time ever on a New Zealand map, we see Scott Base, and Scott Base is in the middle there. And we'll see that in a little bit more detail on some of the other maps. There's a little bit of detail on the interior. The light blue area, well, the light blue areas where it was thought from the results of IGY that the land was below the sea level, and the pink areas where it's above sea level. And that was mostly stuff that was learned by people traversing over the ice and doing science measurements. There are lots of names of different sectors around the coast that have been named. Then after 1963 map, Lands and Survey produced maps in 1979, 1980, in 1987. These progressively add a little bit, but they're not enormous changes. One of them showed sea ice extent, and mostly a few extra details. But the next one we go to is 1994 that Natalie will put up. And so this is quite a different looking one. It's showing the bases again, but if one looked carefully, the interesting thing here is it's showing the heights of the ice and the land in the interior. We hadn't seen that on any of the earlier maps. There's also a little insert up in the corner, which is the area around Ross Island that shows Scott Base and McMurdo Sound. They're just at the bottom of the map in the red there, and that's Mount Erebus, the active volcano that Scott Base sits and McMurdo Base sit just nearby to. Then there's a whole gap of 25 years before the next map, and the next map shows what happened after 25 years, and that's the one we're talking about, 2020, that Natalie will pop up now. And this is the map that we've just produced. And it looks quite different than the other ones. For me, as an ocean scientist, it's kind of exciting. It's showing something in the oceans for the first time. And there's some relief shading that gives you an idea of the shape of the seafloor. There's some interesting relief shading on land. There's some detail of big overland traverses. All the bases are there. And also what we've done now in this map is we show some little insets of science in different subject areas around Antarctica.